5 European cities secretly pushing black people to the margins. You might be surprised to learn that some of Europe's most celebrated cities, the ones often praised as hubs of culture, tolerance, and progress, are quietly pushing black people to the margins. Welcome to BLK Lens, and in today's video, we're diving into a truth that anyone chasing the European dream needs to know. Some of the continent's most iconic urban centers are becoming increasingly difficult places for black communities to truly belong. From housing discrimination and hiring bias to random ID checks on the street without clear cause, these experiences aren't just isolated incidents, they're becoming silent norms. You might think of Paris as the city of light, Berlin as a symbol of freedom, or Barcelona as a paradise of creativity. But in this video, we're peeling back the layers to expose the side no one really talks about. This isn't just about uncomfortable stares or awkward encounters. We're talking about real systems of exclusion, the quiet feeling of being unwelcome in places meant to feel global, and the paradox of being visible everywhere, yet still invisible in the spaces that matter most. If you're black and have ever considered studying, working, or even just traveling through Europe's major cities, this is the kind of insight you don't want to miss. This video isn't here to instill fear, it's here to equip you with a more honest map of the terrain. Trust us, you'll want to stay until the end, because what you're about to hear might just change how you think about the journey ahead. So, find a comfortable seat, get ready for a deep and necessary look beneath the surface. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe to BLK Lens, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the kind of perspective not everyone is telling. 1. Paris. In Paris, the lights never go out. The boulevards glow, cafes spill onto sidewalks, scarves drape just so freedom here feels effortless, like a given. But when your skin is darker than most, that light takes on a colder hue, not warm, but sterile, like the glare of a metro station security check. Many black residents call Paris a city of invisible collisions, where a glance is never just a glance, and distance is never entirely accidental. What's happening in Paris is no longer anecdotal. A 2023 report from France's National Consultative Commission on Human Rights reveals that nearly half of all black people in France say they've experienced racial discrimination in their everyday lives. This number isn't meant to shock, it's meant to illuminate. Because behind every percentage point is a story, an opportunity quietly denied, a job interview that never materialized, a street ID check with no real reason. In Paris, racism doesn't always shout. It lingers in the way you're watched while shopping, in how your hair becomes a topic of workplace chatter, in the polite rejections from landlords. It's not rare for a black person well-educated and financially stable to be turned away from an apartment with some vague reason like, not a good fit for the building. These experiences echo again and again, like footsteps in a tiled metro hallway, quiet but unforgettable. And then there's the familiar story police and the relentless ID checks. For years now, young black Parisians have shared how often they're asked for identification, even when doing nothing wrong. Organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have flagged that as many as 80% of these stops lack legal basis. The exact number may be debated, but the feeling of being constantly singled out quietly, persistently, is beyond question. In March 2024, France's National Assembly passed a bill banning hairstyle-based discrimination, modeled after the U.S. Pretable Crown Act. At first glance, it looked like progress, but within months, more than 100 complaints had already been filed. Enforcement remains shaky. Some advocacy groups claim up to 30% of candidates are still being rejected from jobs solely due to culturally significant hairstyles. When your hair, something so tied to identity, becomes a reason for exclusion, it's not just your opportunity that gets erased, but your very space to exist authentically. EU reports show that Paris stands out in rates of job and housing discrimination against black individuals over half-face bias in these areas. Yet only 15% of such cases are reported. Why? Because people are tired. Tired of proving what everyone already sees. Tired of hoping that speaking out will make a difference. Paris isn't just the city of light, it's the capital of invisible norms, where fitting in often means shaving off parts of yourself, shortening your hair, lowering your voice, walking a little slower just enough to avoid drawing attention. But despite the weight of these invisible rules, black communities in Paris continue to speak up. Organizations like SOS, Racisme, and grassroots movements push forward, demanding the right to live unapologetically, no permission, no justification. And that is Paris, a city where the European dream still glows, but beneath the dazzle is the quiet sidelining of those who don't fit the mold. Not through violence, but through the daily erosion of dignity by social habits that seem harmless on the surface. It's a beautiful city, but for many Black people, there's always a corner the lights don't reach. 2. Berlin. In Berlin, openness wears a well-crafted mask. Multicultural concerts, art cafes, posters championing diversity stretch across Kreuzberg's walls. But when your footsteps carry traces of another continent, your skin, your accent, your hair, you begin to see a different Berlin. A quieter one, but closer to the bone. A Berlin many Black people describe as a place where freedom always comes with conditions. Plenty once believed Berlin was breathable. A city famous for its progressive spirit, a place that dared to tear down the wall dividing itself. But that same city now paints a more complicated picture. Early 2025, the Nadira report by the German Center for Integration and Migration Research revealed that over 60% of Black people regularly face subtle discrimination. A long stare in a store, a strange silence during a job interview, a polite but vague rejection from a landlord. These aren't loud offenses, they're steady, cumulative acts that wear you down without ever being named. The data shows more than half of visibly racialized individuals in Berlin experience discrimination at least once a month, almost 1.5 times more than those who don't carry visible ethnic markers. And it's not confined to private spaces. In cafes, shops, train stations, Black men especially report discriminatory encounters in nearly half of their interactions. For Black women, the numbers aren't far behind. Glances that linger too long, voices that suddenly lower, bodies that stiffen when you walk in small things that aren't small at all when they happen constantly. In 2024, Germany's Federal Anti-Discrimination Agency recorded more than 11,000 complaints, up 6% from the year before. Over a third related to racism, ethnicity, or religion. That's not a minor glitch in the system, it's a system showing its cracks. Most of these cases involved hiring and housing, two of the pillars of a stable life. Black individuals, though not always named explicitly, appear frequently in these narratives. In Berlin, anti-Blackness doesn't always need to declare itself. It simply hums in the background, low but persistent. Economically, the gap isn't just in the numbers, it's in the lived reality. The unemployment rate for foreigners is nearly 5 times higher than for native Germans. While official data doesn't break out Black individuals specifically, they're consistently referenced in research as among the most vulnerable groups. Wage gaps range from 13% to nearly 18% between Germans and foreign workers. It's not a stretch to imagine where Black migrants fall on that spectrum, even with similar degrees, similar skill sets. And Berlin isn't untouched by its colonial past. Names like Togo, Cameroon, Namibia, once erased from school curriculums, are being reintroduced through programs like Decoloniale. They lead walking tours that point out streets named after colonial figures, statues never questioned. These aren't just history lessons, they're return journeys, exposing the roots of prejudices that still operate, just dressed differently. Nadira also warns of the mental toll. Nearly a third of those who face regular discrimination show signs of moderate to severe depression and anxiety. Trust in institutions, especially the police, collapses, dropping from 87% to single digits among those most affected. For Black individuals, the idea of being protected in public spaces starts to feel like a distant dream. Berlin promises new beginnings, especially for those carrying hope. But beneath its modern, progressive facade runs a quiet current where freedom is rationed and equality remains a long-term promise. Efforts like Decoloniale's educational tours and the transparency of ADS reports offer glimmers of light. Still, for Black communities in Berlin, the path to justice remains long and not everyone is watching. 3. Vienna. Vienna is often called the artistic heart of Europe, a city where marble squares still echo with classical music, where old cafes seem to suspend time itself. But for many Black people, the city doesn't hum like a symphony. It's quiet, even choking, like a low note held too long pressing, unspoken whenever they step into a government office, a clinic, a classroom where the first glance doesn't offer a greeting, but a judgment. The reality is that Vienna now ranks among the places with the highest rates of racial discrimination in Europe. A 2023 EU-wide report found that nearly 70% of black people in Austria had experienced discrimination in the past year. That number isn't just a figure, it's a wound, and not one buried in history, but one still bleeding across hospitals, schools, train stations, and workplaces. Nearly half of these incidents take place in public services spaces that should, in theory, treat everyone equally. But for black Austrians, in theory, often feels like a distant promise. There's one name in Vienna that still stops conversations cold: Marcus Omofuma. In 1999, he was bound with tape and suffocated to death during a deportation flight out of Austria. More than 2 decades later, his death remains a symbol not just of violence, but of how institutions sidestep responsibility. Each year on May Day, protesters still carry his name through the streets, but the crowds are thinning. In 2024, only a few hundred showed up. And that too says something no one wants to say. That memory, if not protected, can be absorbed into silence. Many black people in Vienna say that the hardest part isn't the suspicious glance, it's the feeling of invisibility. A black woman with a university degree is still paid nearly 25% less than her white counterparts. Almost half of black refugees live below the poverty line, not because they lack skills or effort, but because the most important doors shut just before they arrive. The data may be incomplete, but the evidence is everywhere. In hushed conversations at legal aid offices, in the echo of, "Sorry, the position's been filled," in the fatigue of being dismissed without explanation. Amid this, there are faint sources of light like ENAR Austria, a civil society organization that supports victims of racial discrimination. They don't have much funding, and their resources are stretched thin, but they remain one of the few places people turn to when the system has nothing to offer but silence. Over 200 cases were documented in 2023, though the true number is likely far higher. Some say that walking into ENAR was the first time they felt their stories were heard, not dissected, not doubted. Still, Vienna clings tightly to its image of refinement, a refinement that often goes hand in hand with a very polished silence, where serious issues are wrapped in polite language and injustice is printed in small font on bureaucratic forms. But you can't live forever in that gray zone. Silence may be courteous, but stretched too long, it becomes complicit. And that's Vienna today, a city so beautiful, it's easy to believe nothing here could be wrong. But for many black people, the wrong is precisely in the things that aren't named, aren't seen, and aren't repaired. When the shadows of colonial history still shape the present, when economic disparities persist without count or correction, then even a European dream named Vienna can quietly begin to fracture from within. 4. Madrid. Madrid is always buzzing, the sound of footsteps echoing through busy streets, sunlight spilling over plazas, music drifting from balconies, as if anything could begin here. But for many black people, Spain's capital isn't a lively Latin rhythm, it's a song constantly interrupted, a beat that skips. A strange look from a landlord, a random ID check, an uncomfortable silence in a job interview. And then came 2024, when the city's offbeat rhythm suddenly rang out louder than ever, the Lavapiés incident. It was an ordinary afternoon until a video went viral. Footage showed Madrid police using force against a group of unarmed black men in the Lavapiés neighborhood. Baton strikes, chokeholds carried out under the guise of maintaining order. Officials cited Spain's controversial gag law as their legal cover, but silence could no longer shield the truth. Not a single officer was disciplined. No formal apology followed, and in that void, trust drained quietly, steadily. Many black residents say that in Madrid, what's hardest to secure isn't opportunity, it's housing. Data from human rights groups shows that over half of black people in the city have been denied rental housing, not because of financial shortcomings, but because landlords simply felt they didn't fit. It's not anecdotal, it's structural. A system that discourages complaints before they're even written, because forms get stalled, cases get ignored, and discrimination comes dressed in the politeness of bureaucracy. Only 1 in 5 affected individuals actually files a complaint. The rest choose silence not because they don't see, but because they've seen it all before. But housing is only part of the story. Being stopped in the street for an ID check is a familiar reality. Recent reports show that black individuals in Madrid are 8 times more likely to be stopped by police. A study from the University of Valencia confirms that most of these stops aren't backed by real suspicion, but by assumptions. The Lavapiés incident isn't an outlier. It's the visible tip of an iceberg shaping the daily relationship between police and community. Still, Madrid isn't entirely still. Activist groups like Kwanzaa and Afrofeminas have stepped out of the silence. They take to the streets, write, and share stories on social media that mainstream outlets often sideline. Anti-discrimination charters have begun to circulate in draft form. Progress is slow, but voices are beginning to create the first cracks in walls, long believed immovable. Madrid was once seen as a city open enough for a fresh start. But for many black people, what they're starting each day isn't a new chapter. It's another cycle of being on guard. Learning how to walk into cafes carefully, keeping documents on hand at all times, getting used to refusals with no explanation. And in the heart of a city that never sleeps, there are communities kept awake for very different reasons, because if they ever drift off, they might wake up pushed out of a dream they were once told was theirs. 5. Barcelona. Barcelona is often praised as a city of creative freedom, a place where art spills across walls, where multiculturalism is part of the brand, where people are told that anyone can find their place. But beneath that vibrant surface, many black people quickly realize there are spaces they were never really invited into. Not because of walls you can see, but because of narrow openings, selective nods, and doors that seem open until you try to walk through them. In reality, Barcelona ranks high when it comes to perceived exclusion among black communities. Nearly half of all racial discrimination complaints filed with the city's Office for Non-Discrimination in 2023 came from black individuals. What's happening isn't loud or violent. It slips into workplaces, classrooms, service counters, spaces where polite words still manage to leave deep cuts. Around 44% of those complaints were workplace-related, where many black people say they're routinely disrespected or quietly passed over for promotions with no explanation. In schools, being socially isolated or treated differently in class isn't uncommon, and the most common label for it is unintentional. The city's Office for Non-Discrimination handled nearly 180 cases involving black individuals last year, making up almost half its caseload. But only 12% of those cases led to legal action. Most were resolved through mediation. The usual reason? Lack of concrete evidence. But many who've lived it will tell you the clearest proof is the pattern that repeats every day. That quiet weight of constantly having to prove you weren't pushed to the bottom of the list just because of your skin. When compared to Madrid, a city that drew international headlines over the Lavapiés incident, it's tempting to think Barcelona has fewer problems. But the truth is, what makes Barcelona's issues more insidious is precisely how little attention they get. The silence allows injustice to continue undisturbed. Many black residents say that in Barcelona, they rarely see signs of overt hostility, but they feel the slow squeeze of subtler exclusion. Being passed over for interviews because their name doesn't sound Spanish, being stared at when walking through high-income neighborhoods, being left out of networks of opportunity despite having lived here for over a decade. Barcelona, for all its energy and allure, still isn't a city for everyone. The government's efforts are commendable, but clearly not enough to uproot the old structures quietly embedded in the system. What's needed isn't just policy, it's movement from within communities, from those who've been pushed to the edges, bringing their voices to the center. Because inclusion doesn't begin with diversity posters, it starts with small decisions. Who gets hired? Who gets trusted? Who's seen as someone who belongs? And that's what makes the European dream in Barcelona so uneasy, not because it doesn't exist, but because it doesn't open its doors to everyone equally. The numbers are only the surface. What remains is how a city chooses to see itself with honesty or with a practiced glance that avoids the shadows simply because they don't make a sound. And that wraps up our look at the 5 European cities quietly pushing black people to the margins. For many, these places still symbolize freedom, opportunity, and the European dream. But behind the cobblestone squares and sunlit streets lie realities that are easy to overlook unless you pause and listen closely. Because not everyone enters that dream with the same kind of ticket. This video isn't meant to paint a bleak picture or discourage anyone from pursuing their journey. On the contrary, it aims to shed light so that anyone planning to live, work, or simply visit these cities can do so with awareness and preparation. When you understand the challenges that might come your way, you're not only protecting yourself, but also helping shift the narrative through your choices, your voice, and your connection to community. If you found this video helpful, or if it made you see something in a new light, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to BLK Lens for more stories that expand your perspective. And if you're Black and have lived in, visited, or know someone with experience in any of the cities we mentioned, please share your story in the comments below. We believe that it's these personal accounts that complete the picture in a way statistics never could. Thanks for staying with us all the way through. And as always, stay safe, stay grounded, and never forget that you deserve to take up space, fully and unapologetically, wherever your path may lead.